Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Adding to the data supporting a surge in cyber criminal activity is the FBI Crime Compliance Center's most recent Internet Crime Report. The IC3 data shows that while the number of reported complaints actually dipped by about 5% last year, the financial losses directly attributed with ransomware, phishing, and other attacks increased by 49%, totaling over $10.3 billion. The report goes on to state that we know not everyone who has experienced a ransomware incident has reported to the IC3. Though cyber criminals are continuously seeking to make their attacks more resilient, more disruptive, and harder to counter, public reporting to the IC3 helps us gain a better understanding of the threats we face daily. The report also called out the top 3 ransomware groups as LockBit, Blackcat, and Hive, none of which are new to the security breach audience. Although manufacturing ranks second to healthcare and public health in terms of industries most frequently facing ransomware attacks, adding other users of industrial control systems, such as utilities and processing facilities, would put the sector far above the next most frequently targeted segment. It's also important to remember that healthcare institutions are mandated by the Strengthening American Cybersecurity Act passed last March to report substantial cyber incidents and ransomware payments. This is not the case for most manufacturing enterprises, which is something today's guest confronts on a daily basis. He'll also offer an in-depth look at new challenges and solutions focused on the ransomware pandemic. But before we talk to him, we're excited to announce that Security Breach is being sponsored by Pentera. For more information on their cybersecurity solutions, you can go to pentera.io. It's now my pleasure to welcome JP Perez-Etchegoyen to the program. He serves as the Chief Technology Officer for Onapsis, a leading provider of integrated cybersecurity offerings. So JP, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to Security Breach. We're going to jump right into the deep end of the pool a little bit and talk about maybe the biggest problem really affecting the industrial sector specifically. That's ransomware attacks. We've seen a number of different reports come out. I know we've had some dialogue about the FBI report that talked about the huge increase in terms of the dollar amounts associated with recent ransomware attacks. What I'm really kind of wondering from your perspective is there something unique about a ransomware attack when the people are going after the industrial sector, critical infrastructure, things of that nature, as opposed to, say, a bank or a hospital?
Thank you for having me. It's great to have this opportunity. Yes, there are a couple of specifics around manufacturing that are worth noting. First and foremost, the diversity, right? We're talking about landscapes that are completely diverse, IT, OT, depending on the specifics on the manufacturing of the company. We are talking about very specific systems for doing the actual manufacturing, logistics, backend systems for people management, for processes. So all of that diversity eventually is definitely not helping around security, right? You know that when we have a very complex and diverse landscape, it's typically when we tend to have gaps because it's very hard to across the board implement security in a holistic and consistent approach. So I would say the fact that we are talking about very diverse environments, very diverse landscapes, and combine that with the fact that especially when we're talking about large manufacturing, these companies go through mergers, acquisitions, they change the technology continuously. They have to adapt, especially important in the manufacturing business, right? Adapting to be efficient. All of that is always contradicting to the fact that security is a process, and making sure that security is implemented across the board is definitely challenging. And ransomware gangs and the ransomware attacks always leverage the weak points, right? All it takes for these organizations is one person clicking on the wrong link to get an infection spread very quickly.
No, and I'm sure our audience, as soon as they heard you say IT and OT, they knew I was going to jump on this one. So I just want to get your input on a couple of things there. the manufacturing sector is getting better, okay, in terms of getting IT and OT to talk to each other and work together, but we still have a long way to go there. So I'd kind of like to get your thoughts on a couple of different things. Number one, how can we get those two entities talking together more from a security perspective? And how do we get organizations to appreciate the fact that IT security and OT security are really two different things? We can't cut and paste there as much as we'd like.
Oh yeah, I totally hear you. So I think it starts by the basic and fundamental fact of communication, but being upfront on it. It doesn't work if you have a whole new line of business that came up with this great technology deployed in a new plant, interconnected with all the rest of the company. Now securing that after the fact, no way, right? You know that's a failure. So as I said, it starts by the fundamental fact of bringing everyone into the table at the sooner rather than later, at the very early stages of every project. And that's no different with IT and OT when you're integrating those scenarios, right? So being purposeful, bringing them sooner rather than later, and all of that basically helps streamlining, because you basically define, you launch the project defining what are the goals and not bringing the project deployed and saying, how do I secure it? So if you want to implement a new technology, if you need to integrate different systems in the company, well, now you can set those quality gates and those security gates right through the project and make sure that the project goes smoothly along the way. And that's, as I said, that's true also when we are talking about IT and OT. And we live and breathe that as well, because we focus on a very specific area of technology that are business applications. And we see that same process, right? We see technology that is brought into the company, which is complex. And if it's not properly addressed from the get-go, then it becomes a problem. So in this case, it's really, hey, let's bring everyone together. Let's set those quality gates, those security gates. What is going to be the process? Who's going to own that? CISO is eventually going to be responsible for everything security in the company. So how do you make sure that the organization of the CISO has the right visibility along the way? So that's already bringing visibility. Only that is already challenging, because some of these technologies from an OT perspective are not historically have not been integrated properly. So bringing that visibility is definitely a challenge.
Do you think some of those integration issues have been because, again, we're trying to take the IT approach, which is really more focused on data and proprietary information, as opposed to what the OT really needs, because it's a much more faster moving environment. It's a lot of different types of data, not personal data, not financial data, it's operational information. Do you think some of that struggle is we just haven't understood how to take some of the IT lessons and apply them on the OT side, or do we need a completely different approach to the OT side of things?
I think you're right, yes. So definitely implementing some of those learnings have been a struggle. And that's why we see also vendors popping up, and we hear in our customers where they deploy some of these vendors that are specifically focused on OT security, and that allow you to bridge that gap of, hey, how do we deal with securing this data that is different from the data that we have in the organization? It's just that we need to still implement those protections and those integrations. So we have seen good success with some of those vendors in the field.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about taking some of this legacy equipment and combining with the new technology. But before we do that, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your company, Onapsis, what you guys do, and sort of where you fit in the cybersecurity defense realm.
Absolutely, yeah. So we started a couple of years ago because we saw that there was a gap from a security perspective, and that gap was also affecting some of the largest organizations in the world. And that's basically Some of these organizations were running really complex, large ERP deployments, very critical, heavily regulated, but those deployments were a complete black box to the CISO. So again, to the point of IT/OT, that's where I really see the parallel. So in this case, every time we were landing in, and I tell you, like some of the largest organizations in the world, it was the same exact output, right? Doing an assessment or a pen test or any type of security review, full of security flaws, full of critical vulnerabilities that would allow anyone to go from zero to hero and full compromise on the entire landscape. So that when we started seeing that repetitive pattern, we realized, hey, like this is a huge problem here. And that's when we started developing technology to really implement some of these well-known concepts of security, like all the way to the basics: vulnerability management, continuous monitoring, secure development lifecycle, security of the interfaces, authorizations of users, all of those concepts that were not properly being addressed in this technology, through automation, through a technology that allows organizations to have visibility and control and governance on these platforms. So that's when we started, and we continue developing the technology that helps organizations bring security into their business critical applications.
Interesting. And it seems like as one of the great things, or well, got to temper my enthusiasm there, one of the positive developments that came out of the pandemic was manufacturing investing in so much more automation and more technology because they had to. They were forced to with the dynamics of the work environment. However, a lot of these investments weren't always secured before they were put in, or they turned the security off during implementation, whatever the case may be. Are there any specific vulnerabilities that you're seeing pop up more prevalently than others, whether it be from remote monitoring technologies, the use of mobile devices, different user interfaces, whatever the case may be? Is there a prominent weak spot, I guess you could say, that you're seeing pop up over and over on the OT side?
I would say threat actors use everything and anything they have to be able to achieve their objective. Having said that, there are a couple of interesting resources that we have been using with our customers very extensively, such as the catalog of known exploited vulnerabilities. That came from CISA and is continuously updated, and it's giving everyone visibility into, hey, these vulnerabilities are actively being used. And we see that, right? When we deploy systems and telemetry to understand what threat actors do, we see always vulnerabilities coming from the KEV being used, because there is a direct link between that and publicly available exploits and information that is being is available to all the threat actors. Also, what we see is really using malware to be able to harvest credentials, and combining those two, actively exploited vulnerabilities with credentials on the systems. Those are the two that are most widely used by ransomware gangs to be able to achieve that initial compromise and then spread across the system. So in manufacturing, we are doing an active research right now, and based on credentials that are available and by threat actors and are put out there, we saw affecting ERP applications. Third industry most affected is manufacturing, right? So it's these type of attacks are very prevalent also in the manufacturing industry. But if we think about the basics, okay, what should I do to prevent this? Well, it starts with basic hygiene, vulnerability management, making sure that those vulnerabilities that are being actively exploited are not there in the system in the first place. And carrying over is really ensuring that the security of authentication mechanisms are in place, two-factor, secure authentication, encryption, all of those good, well-known measures that we need to apply in the authentication process to prevent someone from being able to steal those credentials and use them. So yeah, I would say those two categories are really the most prevalent ones. And I think it's important the note of the catalog of known exploited vulnerabilities, because it's a very useful resource that organizations are using quite extensively.
Makes sense. And when we look at that, because we've talked about the credential harvesting malware before, from your experience in working with people, are they coming in through a phishing scheme? Are they taking advantage of OT endpoint insecurity or connection point vulnerabilities? Is there one prominent entry point that you're seeing being used more frequently than another?
So that's a good question. Our belief is that most credentials that are being exfiltrated are coming from threat actors deploying malware on endpoints, right? Yeah. Now, how they get there in the first place, that depends. In many cases, it's because someone clicked on the wrong link and that computer was infected. But it really depends. Eventually, it's not really because there's a phishing site that for every single application in the world. It's really through the automation that threat actors gain is by developing custom malware to be able to do whatever they need, and eventually that leads into ransomware as well.
Yeah. No, it's equal parts impressive and terrifying at how good these organizations have gotten in terms of customizing their attack and the complexity of them and what they're capable of doing. Kind of leaning into that a little bit, are there any particular threat actors or new different types of tactics? We've talked about the tactics a little bit, so I guess are there any new entities out there sort of on your radar screen that you're especially aware of right now?
Good point. So yes, we are tracking a couple of them, specifically the ones because of our industry and our focus is the ones that are targeting specifically ERP applications. So something that we saw changing, and you mentioned the pandemic. I think that's definitely a milestone from a security perspective, right? Remote work and the acceleration of adoption of technology, as you said. A lot of organizations really rush through projects that would have taken years in a couple of months, cutting some corners and really making some compromises in terms of security. But with all that said, it's really this trend that started a little bit before the pandemic, but really accelerated with the pandemic. We saw threat actors, as I mentioned, they use everything and anything, right? And that involves vulnerabilities in business applications, in ERP, vulnerabilities in OT. They were able to automate a lot of the initial compromise and then harvest credentials and sell them through different forums as well. So all of this automation that started a couple of years ago, but really accelerated during the pandemic, what we saw is, hey, they are paying more and more attention to business application now. They go after business data as well, sitting on ERP applications. They understand and automate how to exploit ERP vulnerabilities, and they use that as part of their campaigns. So going back to the OT analogy, this same thing is happening with OT, right? When they automate and they understand how to exploit vulnerabilities in ERP and how to harvest credentials from ERP and how to extract information from ERP applications. Same thing with OT. They understand how to exploit those vulnerabilities, how to compromise these systems, and how to use that lack of security in OT networks and in the integration between IT and OT that can be used to ultimately compromise the entire organization. So I would say that during the last couple of years, threat actors, the activity from threat actors have been diversified significantly, reaching to corners that weren't such before.
No, that is interesting to hear them getting to the ERP systems like that, because especially in a manufacturing enterprise, that means they can get a hold of almost anything. It's a smart tactic, but also, again, a terrifying one when you see it put into practice. So a couple of the attacks that have kind of gotten more notoriety here of late in the manufacturing sector, there's one on Dole Foods not too long ago. More recently, ABB, a huge components and infrastructure supplier, was a hit. Both, I think, were hit by LockBit, it looks like, in terms of doing a ransomware attack. The thing that was interesting to me for both of those attacks in particular is that the company really didn't talk about it until they were forced to. There was a story on it, then they had to basically respond, let people know what was going on externally. I'm sure internally there was a lot of dialogue. And what gets me is there still seems to be a real reticence in terms of talking about these attacks when they happen, and as a result, we're just not sharing as much information as we could. I've understood in the past why companies were hesitant to be that open about these attacks, but now everybody's getting hit. And it seems like if we could share more information, maybe we could better defend ourselves. I guess I'd like to get your take a little bit on why do companies continue to be so reluctant to share information more proactively, and what can we do to maybe help get them to do that more frequently? I don't know.
No, love your question. When companies are hit, they just get into a crisis mode, right? So it's very hard to be able to manage the flow of information. There's law enforcement in most cases. There's legal departments involved. We have been helping organizations overcome some incidents. I personally been participating in some incident response as well. So it's really hard. It's not as you have a lot of options. You really need to focus on containing and getting back to operations and really understand the extent of the compromise. So I think at some point there are some initiatives that are helping organizations share more. There are networks that you can join. Of course, the ISACs as well. ISACs are good mechanisms to share information. But I think the fact that when an organization gets hit, it's there's so much on the line. And again, you have legal, you have law enforcement. That's why when someone is forced to share because of some type of regulation or some type of law that is in place, that's when there's no option and they start sharing. And most of the learnings are typically shared afterwards. And we learn months after the compromise as they start showing more data. But yeah, it's very hard. And I think the more organizations share, the more of this network effect is going to be popping up, right? So it's really it's up to us, all of us, as professionals in the security industry, to help really organizations be more proactive on the exercise of sharing IOCs, sharing TTPs, and be more open about it. But it's hard, and I know that by working with a lot of organizations in that scenario.
In working with companies from your perspective, how do you start that conversation, or how do you get involved in making sure, hey, yeah, we're back online because we paid, but we still have a lot of work to do. This isn't over.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
How do you isolate the compromise? How do you know the extent of the compromise? And we've been part of some pretty extensive incidents where like the scope is everything, right? So it's not very common, but in some cases they have to throw entire infrastructures and rebuild based on backups and based on what they have. So that's not from one day to the other. It's really hard. So understanding the extent of the scope, that guides the type of effort, because it's no one can afford throwing everything down the table and rebuilding everything from scratch. And I mean like networks, computers, servers, everything. That's let's say a clean sheet and definitely a solution, but it's not applicable to all organizations. And that's where the challenge again. Understanding the scope, the extent. Was that a full domain? Was it a specific application? Was it a set of users? What were they able to compromise, and are they still in? That's a key question. Because even if you close, completely isolate the network, hey, they may still be inside and waiting to be back online. So that's definitely a challenge. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's a difficult topic, but at least there has to be an awareness of both of those. I mean, we've talked about these dwelling attacks where, I mean, it's one of the reasons, I think the number is something like 60% of those have paid ransom attacks get hit again within 6 to 8 months. And a lot of times it's because the bad guys never left. They went after a different area within the system because you weren't able to kick them out to begin with. So I just think there's a lot of thought, especially if you're a smaller manufacturer, of we paid the ransom, we got our data back, we're ready to roll. That's only half the battle. You still need to check these other two bases. And like you said, it's difficult at best. I mean, it's an extensive number of tasks in front of you.
Yeah. Incident responders are, they have a lot of work on when they need to track down threat actors, activity, the extent of a compromise. So it's no easy task.
Absolutely. I want to get your thought. One of the biggest topics right now, really throughout manufacturing, it definitely has a role here in the cybersecurity discussion, is artificial intelligence. I mean, ChatGPT just blew this topic up. So I'd just like to, before we talk about some other bigger trends, just focusing on AI. To me, it seems like there's just as much opportunity for the good guys as the bad guys when it comes to deploying artificial intelligence for cybersecurity reasons. But some people seem to really gravitate towards all of the destruction that this could cause. So maybe you could weigh in here a little bit and offer some thoughts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There is opportunity for both sides, and we are seeing that. Hearing the news, and I follow that very closely because I think it's fascinating how it's been developing since ChatGPT and all the LLMs that have been released, the large language models that even open source organizations are open sourcing on a weekly basis, new technology which requires less resources. Now it's going to be a process, but at some point, every organization is going to be able to develop applications sitting on top of LLMs that will be able to automate, because the power of this is the automation piece, right? Automate pretty much anything, of course, many things. And that also applies to threat actors and defenders. Threat actors are already using these models to build better phishing emails, to build better malware, to create things that look more real to full end users. And defenders are using Microsoft released a feature in Azure that basically allows you to track down threats and automate a lot of the security processes. And all other organizations are following. So a lot of automation is being implemented through these AI large language models. And I think it's at the beginning. What happened in less than a year is just fascinating. And what's going to happen in the next 5 years, I can only imagine where the security solutions are going to be, and also where the bad guys, right? Like the threat landscape, the threat actors are going to have more power of automating things that they used to do manually with the use of AI. So it's been fascinating, to say the least.
Absolutely. So we don't want to just dwell on the problems. We know there's solutions out there as well. So maybe like looking over the next 12 to 18 months, looking at some of the threats, we can't avoid those. We don't want to put our head in the sand, but also talking about some of the developing solutions. What do you think are going to be some of the bigger trends in cybersecurity for the industrial sector to keep tabs on over the next, in the near future?
Yeah. I hate to get back to the topic, but it's AI. It is indeed AI. It's everywhere, and it's touching, especially on the technology industry. And cybersecurity being one of those. So it's touching everywhere, and the pace of innovations that we are seeing. I think AI is going to transform the use cases and the capabilities that organizations have and are going to have to protect themselves. So some things that 5 persons used to do, now with 1 person or with that same team, you're going to be able to do 5x more things, right? Because you're going to be able to track down things, automate a lot of the things that that were manually done, especially from a SOC perspective, from a defense perspective, that you need to deal with so many signals and so many data points and information coming from so many places. Now, being able to automate a lot of that analysis, that's going to be definitely a game changer.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. I agree with you 100% in terms of those opportunities that AI is going to present. It's been interesting. We also had some people on not too long ago who were talking about potentially the bigger role of some of these big cloud providers could play for security down the line. I don't know if you heard anything or would have anything to add, but maybe Amazon's and Microsoft's and some of those other big platform entities getting more involved in more than just patches, but really proactively engaging in cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I think they are. So you mentioned Microsoft, Amazon, Google. They work. They don't only work with individuals. They work with organizations, and organizations are fully integrated and embedded into their solutions. So they are upping their game in security for sure. They are implementing more and more capabilities to secure systems and to detect compromises, because it's all about cloud, right? It's running on their system, so they have that visibility. They have the opportunity to implement the automation. So I think yes, we're gonna see more and more these big cloud providers, especially the large ones, the ones that we mentioned, bringing more security into all of their capabilities. And some will incorporate that through existing subscriptions. Some will definitely provide a premium for that, but it's going to be more and more available to organizations, for organizations to be able to use.
Yeah. See, it's not all doom and gloom when it comes to cybersecurity. Had to bring it back around. Hey, JP, this has been awesome. Anything else you'd like to add before we kind of shut down?
No, I think just going back to the point of on the analogy of OT and ERP, really especially important for organizations in the manufacturing industry. Hey, like, make sure that whenever you plan security, you incorporate also visibility into your gaps, right? If you don't have the right visibility into OT, if you don't have the right visibility to the technology that you're running and that is supporting your business, then you are sitting on a ton of risk. So it's important to be able to address that as well. And there are, going back to the positive side, there are solutions for that. So there are. It's not all negative. So there are ways to address that. And there is a lot of documentation and automation in place that can help you address that. So I think it's an important part of a successful cybersecurity strategy.
Thanks, JP. And for more information on the work Onapsis does, you can check them out at onapsis.com. Thanks for joining us today. And to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For JP Perez-Etchegoyen, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.